"This is my girlfriend." He said it. At his wife's birthday party, in front of everyone. His hand on another woman's waist, like she belonged there. The room froze. No one laughed. No one spoke. Then his mother stepped forward, placed divorce papers next to the birthday cake and said, "You will leave with nothing." All eyes turned to Catherine, waiting for her to break, to cry, to beg. But she didn't. She just held her daughter and stayed completely silent. Because in that moment, she wasn't shocked. She was already planning something that would destroy everything they thought they owned. My husband brought his girlfriend to my birthday party, and he didn't know he was standing in my house. The evening air was warm, golden light stretching across the backyard as soft jazz played and guests laughed under strings of glowing lights. Catherine stood at the center of it all, composed and effortlessly elegant, a black woman whose presence didn't demand attention, yet quietly commanded it. At 44, she carried herself with a calm authority, shaped by years of restraint rather than comfort. Her deep brown skin reflected the soft amber lighting, her posture upright, her movements measured. Her hair was pulled into a sleek, low bun, revealing the fine line of her jaw and the gold compass pendant resting against her chest, a small, deliberate detail that hinted at something rooted deeper than wealth or appearance. Catherine was not the kind of woman who reacted impulsively. She observed, she waited, and when she moved, it was never without purpose. Beside her stood her children. Ethan, 12, already carried himself like someone older. Tall for his age, with a lean build and tightly coiled hair cut short, he had the kind of stillness that came from watching too much and speaking too little. His eyes were sharp, always scanning, always calculating. He didn't trust easily, not because he was taught not to, but because he had learned early that things could shift without warning. His body angled slightly in front of his younger sister, a subtle but constant instinct to shield. Maya, 10, was different, softer. Her small hand clung to the fabric of Catherine's dress, her braided hair tied neatly with pale ribbons that matched her light blue outfit. Her emotions lived on the surface, visible, immediate, unfiltered. She leaned into her mother not out of weakness, but because Catherine was the one place where the world felt stable. "Mom, is he coming?" Maya asked quietly. Catherine didn't answer right away, because she already knew. Ethan's gaze shifted toward the entrance before anyone else noticed. His jaw tightened. "He's here." The gate opened, and just like that, everything changed. Marcus stepped inside like he owned the moment. He was a man who had always relied on presence to control a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, his movements deliberate, his jawline sharp beneath a carefully trimmed beard. His confidence wasn't natural, it was constructed, built over years of needing to appear stronger than he actually felt. He dressed like a man who wanted to be respected, spoke like a man who expected to be obeyed, and carried himself like someone who believed control was the same as power. But tonight, he didn't come alone. His hand rested firmly around the waist of a woman walking beside him. Not loosely, not casually, deliberately. Amber. She was younger, early 30s, with a tall, sculpted figure and long, straight hair that fell perfectly over her shoulders. Her skin held a warm, polished glow, her makeup precise, her red dress chosen for one reason, to be seen. Amber was not nervous. She wasn't uncertain. She walked in as if she had already replaced someone, as if she had already won. Her smile wasn't forced. It was confident, almost amused, like she understood something no one else did. The laughter around the garden faded. One conversation stopped, then another, until silence spread across the entire space. Marcus didn't hesitate, didn't slow down, didn't look back. He walked straight toward Catherine. Ethan shifted instantly, stepping slightly forward, placing himself just ahead of Maya. His shoulders tightened. His eyes locked onto Marcus, not with confusion, but with recognition, like he had been expecting something like this. Maya's fingers tightened around Catherine's dress. Catherine didn't move. Not a step, not a breath out of place. Marcus stopped in front of her. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no apology in his, only certainty. "This is Amber," he said, his voice calm, clear enough for everyone to hear. A pause. Then, "My girlfriend." The word didn't echo. It landed, heavy, final, irreversible. Maya inhaled sharply. Ethan's jaw clenched harder. A glass slipped slightly in someone's hand nearby, the faint sound cutting through the silence like a crack. Catherine felt it. Not pain, not shock, clarity. Because in that single moment, everything she had already suspected quietly confirmed itself. The distance, the silence, the absence. This wasn't sudden. This was inevitable. And Marcus thought this was the moment he took control. But what he didn't understand was that control had never belonged to him. Before Catherine could speak, another figure stepped forward, Dorothy. Marcus's mother moved with the rigid elegance of someone who had spent her life trying to prove she belonged somewhere higher. Tall, thin, her posture sharp, her silver-streaked hair styled flawlessly, she carried judgment like it was a personal right. Her expression was composed, but beneath it lived years of quiet resentment, toward Catherine, toward anything she couldn't dominate. She tapped her glass lightly. The sound cut clean through the silence. "I think it's time we stop pretending," Dorothy said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. From her handbag, she pulled out a set of neatly arranged documents, divorce papers. She placed them down carefully, right beside the untouched birthday cake. "My son deserves better." The words were precise, calculated, designed to humiliate. Maya's breathing became uneven. Ethan stepped forward again, instinctively placing himself between his mother and Marcus. And Catherine finally moved, but not the way anyone expected. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at the papers. She didn't look at Dorothy. Instead, she bent down and pulled Maya into her arms, one hand resting gently against her daughter's head, steady, calm, unshaken. The entire garden waited, for anger, for tears, for something. But Catherine gave them nothing, because she wasn't reacting. She was deciding. And somewhere deep beneath that silence, a different kind of power was already in motion. Marcus thought he had just taken everything from her. He had no idea. He had just signed himself into losing everything. The music had long faded, and the last car's taillights disappeared beyond the gates, leaving the estate wrapped in a silence that felt heavier than the night itself. Catherine remained in the backyard long after everyone had gone. The candles had burned low, wax pooling along the edges of the glass holders, and the untouched birthday cake sat slightly melted under the warm air, its perfect surface now beginning to collapse. The chair across from her was empty. The space where Marcus had stood still felt occupied, as if the moment hadn't fully released its grip on the air. She sat alone, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, her hands resting loosely in her lap. There were no tears, no trembling, only stillness. Slowly, almost unconsciously, her fingers lifted to the gold compass pendant resting against her chest. The metal was warm from her skin, familiar, grounding. She closed her eyes. And the world shifted, not backward in time like a memory replayed for comfort, but deeper into something that had shaped her long before this night ever existed. Kentucky, red dirt roads stretching endlessly beneath a wide, unforgiving sky, heat that clung to the skin, silence that wasn't peaceful but isolating. Catherine as a child had been smaller, thinner, quieter, not by nature but by necessity. Her skin had always been the same deep shade, but back then it carried dust and sun rather than the soft glow of controlled lighting. Her hair, thick and tightly coiled, was often tied back in simple styles her grandmother could manage with limited time and even fewer resources. Her parents were gone before she fully understood what loss meant. A fire, sudden, final. There were no long goodbyes, no explanations that made sense to a child, just absence. And then there was Nana May. Nana May was not a soft woman, not in the way people expected grandmothers to be. She was tall, with a strong frame that had been shaped by decades of labor, her hands rough but precise. Her skin was darker, marked by time and sun, and her gray hair was always pulled back tightly, never loose, never careless. Her eyes were sharp, piercing in a way that made it impossible to lie, even about small things. She did not speak often, but when she did, her words stayed. Catherine remembered one evening more clearly than the rest. She had been about 8 years old, sitting on the wooden steps outside their small home, her knees pulled close to her chest, watching the horizon as if waiting for something to return. "Why don't you cry?" Nana May had asked from behind her. Catherine hadn't turned around. "I did," she said quietly. "It didn't change anything." There had been a long pause. Then Nana May stepped beside her, lowering herself slowly, her joints stiff but controlled. She placed something in Catherine's hand, a small gold compass. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't polished, but it was steady. "You don't cry to change the world," Nana May said. "You learn to understand it." Catherine looked down at the compass, the needle shifting slightly before settling again. "When you know where you stand," Nana May continued, "no one else can move you." That night didn't make Catherine stronger. It made her still. And stillness, over time, became her power. The memory dissolved as her eyes opened again, returning to the quiet backyard. Nothing about tonight had surprised her. Not Marcus, not Amber, not Dorothy. Only the timing. She had seen the signs months ago. The subtle financial inconsistencies, the changes in behavior, the quiet arrogance creeping into Marcus's decisions, as if he had begun to believe something that had never been true. Catherine had not confronted him, because confrontation ends a game, and she wasn't ready for it to end. Inside the house, a faint sound echoed, soft footsteps moving cautiously across the floor. Ethan appeared first, standing just inside the doorway. His posture was tense, but controlled, as if he were trying to hold himself together by sheer will. His eyes found Catherine immediately. "You're still out here," he said. Not a question, a statement. Maya followed behind him, her smaller frame half hidden, her expression uncertain, still processing what she had witnessed. She hesitated before stepping forward, her movements slower, more fragile. "Are you okay?" Maya asked softly. Catherine turned toward them, her expression unchanged, calm, warm, steady. She stood, closing the distance between them in a few quiet steps, and wrapped one arm around each of them. "I'm right here," she said. Ethan didn't relax completely, but his shoulders lowered slightly. Maya leaned fully into her, resting her head against Catherine's side. "Is he coming back?" Maya whispered. Catherine paused, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she understood what the question really meant. "Not tonight," she said gently. And that was enough, for now. She guided them back inside, making sure they settled into their rooms, waiting until their breathing softened into sleep. Only then did she return to the living room, the house now quiet in a different way, controlled, contained. She walked to a small desk near the window and picked up her phone. No hesitation, no emotion, just precision. She dialed a number she hadn't needed to use in months. The line connected almost immediately. "Harrison speaking." His voice was calm, low, and measured, the voice of a man who did not waste words. Harrison Cole was in his early 50s, a tall, sharply dressed man with a narrow face and steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. His hair was cut short, streaked with silver, and his posture carried the quiet discipline of someone who had once lived a very different life. Before becoming Catherine's most trusted advisor, he had spent years in corporate litigation, known for dismantling opponents not through force, but through patience and precision. He was not emotional. He was not reactive. He was effective. Catherine didn't explain. She didn't need to. "It's time," she said. A brief pause. Not surprise, recognition. "I understand," Harrison replied. Catherine ended the call and set the phone down gently. Outside, the wind shifted slightly, moving through the trees like a quiet signal. Marcus thought tonight was the beginning of her downfall. What he didn't know was that Catherine had just opened a door he would never be able to close. By the time the sun rose over the estate, nothing looked different, but everything had already shifted beneath the surface. Marcus woke up in a hotel suite across the city, the kind of place designed to feel expensive without ever feeling personal. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a pale strip of morning light that cut across the polished floor. Amber was still asleep beside him, her body turned slightly away, her breathing slow and even, untouched by the weight of what had happened the night before. Marcus sat at the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at nothing in particular. To anyone watching, he would have looked calm, collected even, but inside, something restless moved beneath that surface, something he refused to name. He told himself it was relief, that he had finally done what needed to be done, that the performance last night had been necessary. Because in his mind, this was a transition, not a collapse. Marcus had always believed he was the one holding everything together. The house, the lifestyle, the financial stability. It all made sense to him as something he had built, something he had earned. He worked hard, made decisions, carried responsibility. That was the story he told himself, and over time he had come to believe it without question. He stood and walked toward the window, adjusting his cufflinks out of habit. His reflection in the glass looked exactly the same, sharp, controlled, composed, a man in charge. But control, Marcus had learned, was often about perception, and he had never looked closely enough at what he thought he controlled. Across the city, in a quiet office building that did not advertise its importance, Harrison Cole was already at work. His office was minimalist, almost cold. Clean lines, dark wood, no unnecessary decoration. He believed clutter clouded judgment. Every object in the room had a purpose, and anything without one had long been removed. Harrison himself stood near the center desk, reviewing a set of documents spread in precise alignment. He wore a charcoal suit tailored perfectly to his lean frame, his movements deliberate, efficient. His face remained unreadable, but his eyes, sharp, steel gray, moved quickly across every detail, catching what others would miss. Years ago, a high-profile corporate case had nearly destroyed his career when he trusted the wrong partner. Since then, Harrison had rebuilt himself around one principle: never assume, always verify. The door opened quietly. A woman stepped inside, carrying a tablet and a folder pressed neatly against her side. "Everything's prepared," she said. Her name was Elena Vargas, early 40s, tall and composed, with olive-toned skin and dark hair pulled into a tight, professional knot. Her features were sharp, her expression focused, her movements controlled. Elena had once worked in international finance, navigating complex offshore structures before joining Harrison years ago. She was not easily impressed, not easily shaken, and rarely wrong. Harrison didn't look up immediately. Status. Elena placed the folder on the desk, opening it with precision. Primary assets remain secured under the trust. No direct ownership exposure. All transfers initiated overnight are complete. Harrison nodded slightly. And Marcus? Elena allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. Not amusement, but recognition. He believes he's in control. Harrison finally looked up. Good. Because that was the key. Not force, not confrontation, but belief. Across town, Catherine stood in her walk-in closet, the morning light filtering softly through the high windows. The room was quiet, organized, every piece of clothing arranged with intention rather than excess. She selected a simple outfit, nothing that demanded attention, nothing that explained anything. She did not need to prove anything today. Her reflection in the mirror was the same as the night before. Calm, controlled, untouched. But inside, every piece was already moving. The truth was never about hiding wealth. It was about controlling visibility. Mayrose Holdings had never been designed to be seen. It existed as a structure, not a persona, a network of layered ownership, trusts, and holding entities that separated control from identity. Properties were held under subsidiary names. Investments were routed through private funds. Legal ownership existed on paper in ways that required effort and intelligence to understand. Marcus had never asked the right questions, and Catherine had never corrected him, not because she was deceptive, but because she understood something he didn't. People rarely see beyond what they expect to see. He saw a comfortable life, so he assumed it came from him. Catherine picked up her phone, scrolling briefly before stopping on a name she trusted more than most. She didn't call this time. She didn't need to. Everything had already been set in motion. At that exact moment, across multiple financial systems, quiet adjustments were taking place. Access points were being redefined. Permissions were shifting. Accounts that Marcus believed he could reach were no longer accessible in the same way. Not locked, not blocked, just moved. Invisible changes, the kind you don't notice until you need them. Back in the hotel suite, Marcus reached for his phone, checking notifications out of habit. Emails, messages, nothing unusual, nothing alarming, which only reinforced what he believed, that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Amber stirred slightly behind him, her voice soft with sleep. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus didn't turn around. "Next steps," he said. Amber smiled faintly, eyes still closed. "You always are." Because that was who he thought he was, a man already ahead, a man already winning. He didn't know that every next step he was about to take had already been accounted for. Catherine stepped out of the closet, her movements smooth, unhurried. She paused briefly near the window, looking out across the estate. The same lawn, the same space where everything had shifted the night before. Nothing looked different. And that was exactly the point. Her phone vibrated once, a single message from Harrison. Phase 1 complete. Catherine read it, then locked the screen. No reaction, no smile, only certainty. Marcus believed he was walking away with everything, but the truth had never been in his hands, and very soon he was going to realize he had been living inside her world the entire time. Marcus had always believed that control came from speed. Make the move first, push the situation forward, don't give the other side time to think. That was how you won. By the third day after the party, he had already set the process in motion. The divorce filing wasn't just submitted, it was accelerated. Urgent, strategic, final. He sat inside a private legal office downtown, one leg crossed over the other, fingers tapping lightly against the armrest as if the outcome had already been decided. Across from him sat Daniel Reeves, the attorney Dorothy had insisted on hiring. Daniel was a man in his late 40s, tall with a broad frame that suggested former athletic discipline, though time had softened it slightly. His hair was dark but thinning at the temples, his beard neatly trimmed, his suit expensive without being flashy. He carried himself with confidence, but it was the kind built on reputation rather than instinct. Daniel had spent years winning cases through aggression, pushing harder, faster, louder than his opponents. It had worked often enough that he no longer questioned it. Dorothy sat beside Marcus, her posture rigid, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching everything with the sharp attention of someone who had waited years for this moment. Her expression held no doubt, no hesitation. To her, this was not a risk. It was correction. Daniel slid the documents across the table. These are the finalized terms: property distribution, account separation, residential assignment. His tone was smooth, rehearsed. You'll want to review before signing. Marcus picked up the pen before finishing the first page. He skimmed, but he didn't read. Not really. His eyes moved across the words, catching phrases that confirmed what he already believed. Primary residence, financial control, asset reassignment. Everything looked right because everything matched his expectation. Dorothy leaned slightly closer, her voice low. This is what we discussed. Marcus nodded once. That was enough. He signed, not carelessly, confidently, because in his mind, this was not a gamble. This was a conclusion. Across the table, Daniel watched the signature settle onto the page. For a brief moment, just a fraction, something in his expression shifted. Not doubt, not concern, just a flicker of something quieter. He had seen complex structures before. He had learned that wealth did not always sit where it appeared to. But he also knew his client, and clients like Marcus didn't want complications. They wanted confirmation. So Daniel said nothing, because sometimes silence wasn't agreement. It was compliance. Across town, in a building that did not appear on any list of importance, Harrison stood in front of a large digital display, reviewing a live breakdown of asset structures. Lines connected entities, accounts, trusts, an invisible web that only a few people in the world could fully understand. Elena stood beside him, arms crossed lightly, her gaze steady. "He signed," she said. Harrison didn't react immediately. Of course he did. On the screen, several nodes shifted, ownership layers restructured, access pathways rerouted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but precisely. "He believes the residence transfers to him under spousal allocation," Elena continued. Harrison allowed himself the faintest exhale. "He's reading surface-level ownership." Elena nodded. "He doesn't see the trust barrier." Because the house, the one Marcus believed he was claiming, was never directly owned in the way he assumed. It existed under Catherine May Trust, nested within May Rose Holdings, protected by layers that required more than legal reading. They required understanding. And Marcus had never understood. Back at the estate, Catherine sat at the long dining table, a single folder open in front of her. The room was quiet, morning light stretching across the polished surface, reflecting softly against her steady expression. She wasn't reviewing documents. She already knew them. She was observing timing, sequence, movement. Her phone buzzed once, a notification. Marcus had signed. Catherine closed the folder gently, not because the moment was over, but because it had just begun. Upstairs, the soft sound of movement echoed as Maya walked into the hallway, still in her sleep clothes, her hair slightly undone, her eyes searching. "Mom?" Catherine looked up immediately. "I'm here." Maya walked down slowly, her small steps hesitant but purposeful. "Are things different now?" she asked. Catherine paused, considering the question, not the words, but the feeling behind them. "Yes," she said softly. "They are." Maya nodded, accepting it without fully understanding. Children didn't need details, they needed certainty. Catherine stood, walking toward her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Go get ready," she said. "We're still moving forward." Because that was the truth. Nothing had stopped. Everything had shifted. Across the city, Marcus stepped out of the legal office with Dorothy beside him, the signed documents secured neatly in a leather folder. The air felt lighter, cleaner, like something had been resolved. Dorothy allowed herself a small smile. "It's done." Marcus nodded. "It's done." But as they walked toward the car, his phone vibrated, a notification from one of his financial accounts. He glanced down briefly. "Access error." He frowned. Tried again. Same message. "Probably a system delay," he muttered, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Because that made sense. It had to. Inside the car, Dorothy began discussing next steps, property arrangements, social positioning, how they would present everything publicly. Marcus listened, but not fully. Something small had shifted in his mind. Not concern, just friction. Back at the office, Harrison watched another line on the screen fade and reconnect under a different node. "Phase 2 initiated," Elena said quietly. Harrison nodded. "Keep it invisible." Because that was the point. No confrontation, no warning, just quiet movement, the kind you don't feel until it's too late. Marcus believed he had just secured his future. He believed he had taken control of the house, the assets, the outcome. But what he didn't understand was that every signature he had written had just removed his last piece of control. And the moment he tried to use what he thought he owned, he was going to realize there was nothing there. The invitation arrived 3 days later, embossed in thick ivory paper, edged with gold, its weight heavier than necessary, as if importance could be measured by texture alone. Marcus held it between his fingers, reading the title again, Grand Pavilion Annual Education Gala. Below it, a single line stood out more than the rest, sponsored exclusively by May Rose Holdings. He didn't recognize the name, but he recognized what it meant. money, influence, access. Exactly the kind of room he had been trying to enter. Marcus stood in the living area of his temporary apartment, a high-rise space that overlooked the city but lacked the quiet authority of the estate he had left behind. The furniture was modern, sharp-edged, recently purchased. It looked expensive, but it didn't feel established. There was no history in the walls, no weight, just appearance. Amber stood nearby, adjusting an earring in the reflection of a floor-length mirror. Tonight she wore a black silk gown that traced her figure with calculated precision, the fabric catching light with every movement. Her posture was confident, her chin slightly raised, not out of arrogance, but expectation. Amber had always believed in upward movement. She didn't attach herself to uncertainty. She attached herself to trajectory. "This is exactly what you need," she said, glancing at Marcus through the mirror. "These events, they decide who matters." Marcus adjusted his cuff, nodding once. He believed that, because he had spent years trying to reach rooms like this, rooms where deals happened without contracts, where status was decided without discussion, where people didn't ask who you were because they already knew. And tonight, he would be one of them. Across the room, Dorothy observed them both, seated in a straight-back chair with her usual rigid posture. She wore a deep emerald gown that complemented her silver-streaked hair, her expression sharp, almost satisfied. To her, this wasn't just an event. It was confirmation. "This is where everything aligns," she said. "People will see you differently now." Marcus didn't respond, because he already saw himself differently, and that was enough. The Grand Pavilion stood at the edge of the city's historic district, its architecture a blend of classical stone and modern restoration. Tall columns framed the entrance, while soft golden lighting illuminated every detail with deliberate elegance. Inside, the space expanded into a grand hall of marble floors, high ceilings, and carefully placed chandeliers that reflected light in controlled brilliance. Guests moved in quiet confidence. No rushed gestures, no raised voices. Conversations here weren't loud. They were intentional. Marcus stepped inside with Amber at his side, Dorothy just behind them. He felt it immediately. The shift, the attention. Not direct, not obvious, but present. He belonged here. Or at least, he believed he did. Amber's hand rested lightly against his arm, her eyes scanning the room, assessing, measuring. She recognized the type of people here, the way they dressed, the way they stood, the subtle hierarchy in how they interacted. She had seen this world before, but never from this position, never as someone who could stay. "This is bigger than I thought," she murmured. Marcus allowed himself a faint smile. "It always is." Across the room, a man stood near the central stage, speaking quietly with event staff. His name was Dr. Julian Rowe, the director of the foundation hosting the gala. He was a man in his early 60s, tall and slender, with a narrow face and neatly combed silver hair. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the lighting, and his posture carried the refined stiffness of someone who had spent decades in academic and philanthropic circles. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention. Dr. Rowe believed deeply in structure, in legacy, in systems that outlived individuals. And tonight he was preparing to introduce something, or someone, that would shift the room. Marcus didn't notice him. Not yet. Because Marcus was focused on something else. Positioning, movement, recognition. Dorothy leaned closer. "We'll stay near the center. That's where the important people gather." Marcus nodded, guiding Amber forward. Step by step, they moved deeper into the room, closer to the stage, closer to visibility. What they didn't realize was that they were being positioned, not by themselves, but by design. In a quiet section near the front, a table remained reserved, untouched by the flow of guests. Its placement was intentional, centered, visible from every angle. And slowly, without announcement, without attention, Catherine arrived. She did not enter with spectacle. She did not demand the room to turn. But it did, because presence like hers didn't need introduction. She wore a gown in a muted shade of rose gray, elegant in its simplicity, the fabric falling naturally without excess detail. Her hair remained pulled back, her posture unchanged, calm, grounded, immovable. The gold compass rested against her chest, catching the light for a brief moment as she walked. Beside her were Ethan and Maya, dressed with the same quiet coordination, refined, understated, deliberate. Ethan walked slightly ahead, his posture more assured than before, while Maya stayed close, her expression softer but no longer uncertain. They moved to the reserved table, sat, and waited. Marcus didn't see her at first, because he wasn't looking for her. In his mind, she was already behind him, already irrelevant. On stage, Dr. Rowe stepped forward, adjusting the microphone slightly. The room softened into attention almost instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, measured. "Tonight's event would not exist without the continued support of one extraordinary organization." Marcus's attention shifted. This was the moment, the sponsor, the connection, the opportunity. "Mayrose Holdings," Dr. Rowe continued. A quiet murmur moved through the room. Not surprise, but recognition, respect. Marcus felt it, that name again. Important, powerful, exactly where he needed to align himself. Amber's grip on his arm tightened slightly. "This is it," she whispered. On stage, Dr. Rowe paused briefly, allowing the weight of the name to settle before continuing. "And for the first time in 5 years," another pause, longer this time, "the founder has chosen to join us tonight." The room shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Marcus straightened slightly. Dorothy leaned forward. Amber's eyes sharpened with focus. This was the moment that defined rooms like this, the reveal, the alignment of power. Dr. Rowe turned slightly, extending a hand toward the audience. "Please welcome." Marcus followed the gesture, and for the first time that night, he saw her, not as his wife, not as the woman from the party, but as something else entirely, something he had never understood. And in that single moment, before a single word was spoken, something inside him shifted, because for the first time, he wasn't sure what he was about to witness. The aftermath did not arrive with noise. It didn't crash through doors or announce itself in dramatic declarations. It unfolded quietly, piece by piece, over the following weeks. Subtle shifts that, when combined, left nothing the same. Marcus noticed it first in the smallest places. Not in the headlines, there were none. Not in public humiliation, Catherine had offered him none. But in the quiet resistance of systems he had once moved through effortlessly. Accounts that required additional verification, calls that were redirected, transactions that no longer completed as expected. At first, he told himself it was temporary, a technical delay, a procedural adjustment following the divorce process. But delays don't repeat, and adjustments don't tighten. Marcus sat in his apartment one evening, staring at his phone, his jaw clenched as he refreshed the same screen again and again. The numbers hadn't changed, the access hadn't returned, and for the first time, the silence around him didn't feel controlled. It felt empty. Amber noticed it too, but she noticed differently. She stood near the window, her posture no longer relaxed, her reflection no longer confident. She was still the same woman on the surface, tall, composed, carefully dressed, but the calculation behind her eyes had shifted. Amber had built her life on recognizing direction, who was rising, who was stable, who was worth attaching herself to. It wasn't love that guided her, it was trajectory. And Marcus was no longer moving upward. "Have you fixed it yet?" she asked, her tone light but not soft. Marcus didn't look at her. "It's being handled." Amber turned fully now, crossing her arms slightly. "You've been saying that for days." There was no accusation in her voice, only assessment. Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing control back into his expression. "It's just restructuring. These things take time." Amber studied him for a moment longer, not emotionally, logically. Then she nodded once, not in agreement. In conclusion, She didn't argue. She didn't press further. Because Amber didn't fight losing positions, she exited them. And over the next few days, she did exactly that. No confrontation, no dramatic goodbye, just distance. First in conversation, then in presence, then entirely. By the end of the second week, she was gone. Marcus didn't chase her, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know what he would say. Across the city, Dorothy sat in a quiet dining room, surrounded by people she had once considered her circle. Women who had admired her presence, respected her standards, accepted her as part of their world. But something had changed. The conversations were shorter now, the smiles more polite, the invitations less frequent. Dorothy held her posture the same way she always had, straight, composed, unyielding. But beneath that surface, something unfamiliar had begun to press inward. Not shame, not regret, displacement. She had spent years positioning herself as someone who belonged among influence, someone who understood value, who recognized worth. And now, she realized she had misjudged the one person she should have understood most. But Dorothy was not a woman who apologized. She simply remained, even when the room no longer did. The legal process concluded without spectacle, no drawn-out battle, no public conflict. The documents moved through the system exactly as designed, clean, efficient, final. Marcus retained what he could prove, which, in the end, was very little. The house remained untouched, not because Catherine fought for it, but because it had never been his to claim. And without access to the structures beneath it, Marcus had no leverage left to argue otherwise. He walked away with what appeared to be dignity, but without foundation, dignity doesn't hold shape for long. Weeks later, on a quiet morning, the estate looked exactly as it had before the party. The same light, the same stillness, the same carefully maintained order. Catherine sat outside with a cup of coffee, the warmth of it steady in her hands. She wore something simple, nothing designed to impress, nothing designed to prove, because there was nothing left to prove. Ethan stepped out first, his posture more relaxed now, though still aware. He had not asked questions about what had happened. He had observed, understood in his own way, and accepted it. Maya followed, lighter than before, her movements no longer hesitant. She ran toward Catherine, wrapping her arms around her without pause, without fear. "Mom," she said, looking up, "everything's okay now, right?" Catherine set the cup down gently, brushing a hand over Maya's hair. There was no hesitation in her answer. "Yes," she said softly. Ethan sat beside them, quiet but present. Catherine reached up, her fingers once again finding the gold compass resting against her chest. The metal was warm, familiar, unchanged. She looked out across the lawn, not at what had happened, not at what had been lost, but at what remained. And what remained was always hers, because she had never built her life on what others could take. She had built it on what they couldn't see. Marcus believed he had been defeated. Amber believed she had made the wrong investment. Dorothy believed she had been misled. But Catherine knew the truth was simpler than all of that. She had not destroyed them. She had not exposed them. She had not even fought them. She had simply stepped aside and allowed them to walk exactly where they were always going. And as the morning light settled across the estate, calm and unchanged, one truth remained quietly beneath everything. The most powerful moves are never the loudest ones. They're the ones you don't even realize happened, until you look back and understand you were never in control at all. Real strength doesn't make noise. It doesn't humiliate. It waits and then reveals. How many people have you underestimated just because they stayed silent? Because silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's control. Catherine didn't fight. She didn't take revenge. She simply knew who she was. And that's the difference. You don't lose when someone betrays you. You lose when you don't know your own value. So ask yourself, are you reacting to life or understanding it? If this hit you, share it with someone who needs it. And if you've ever been the one people overlooked, comment "silent power." This story is fictional. but the lesson? Very real.